My childhood best friend Marie and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours from our hometown and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided that we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest with more tall, thick brush. We were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. We hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought of anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps follows. Marie glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the time, the running stops, and I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both start to panic, getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks and we're in a parking lot. Suddenly Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it, silently understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point. We're both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climb in and begin to paddle out into the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us, and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with a hood up, despite it being in the middle of July, had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as she stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away in his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds that we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reach the center of the lake and stop paddling. I pull out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had, thank God, given me, just in case. I hand it to Marie and I tell her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and just go completely pale, lifting a hand to point at what she's seeing. I turn, and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out towards us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so bad the whole time as the sun got lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by that time, we reached the shore and it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we just didn't go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask her parents to come get us then. But it worked out and we got back safe, and we thankfully never saw that hooded man again. When I was 18 and freshly broken up with my way older boyfriend, I basically went crazy with dating guys. At the time, I also dressed very goth, even going as far as to wear a real corset and trench coat, mostly just enjoying the attention. One particular afternoon, my friend and roommate at the time decided to eat at a local Japanese restaurant, with both of us all dressed up. Our waiter was a mediocre, skinny white guy who was clearly a little alternative, but it was hard to really tell with the uniform. We joked about me leaving my phone number on the receipt or something, so I hyped myself up and did so. And late that night, he sent me a text message. We talked for a few days, never really having a right time to meet up as I worked 40 minutes away from where I lived. He mentioned the boots that he wore meant a lot to him and some other odd things that just seemed like edgy jokes. One really late night coming home, I was texting and driving, as any 18-year-old does, and we decided to meet up. My stupid self invited him over to my apartment where it was just me and the roommates who had been with me before. Our other two roommates were not home. At first it was fine because I was already drunk, so I could just let him rant about whatever he wanted to. He went on about his life, going to jail, medical bills, his parents, etc. And eventually he asked me if I wanted to see his tattoos, and I was like, okay. He lifted up his shirt, and not only could I see the handgun tucked in his waistband, but also his multiple badly covered up Nazi tattoos. One was even just slightly covered with a banana. I don't know what it was, but I simply decided the best way to deal with this situation was to appease him, so I went along with it casually. I don't remember exactly every detail because it was over 2 years ago and I was drunk, but he ended up pulling his gun out and putting it to my head, asking me if I was scared. I was immensely confused and tried to call his bluff, saying I wasn't, which got him to put it away for a while. When we went to hook up in my messy room, he pulled it on me again, saying he wanted to do it with it out. I got mad and tried to fight him off of me and get it away from my head. Of course, I wasn't as strong as him, and he hit me in the arm with it, which that hurt because it was a nice one. When I finally got him off me and he realized that I was angry, not scared, he started acting like a crackhead, saying I was crazy for not caring about him pulling a gun on me, and he ran off, jumping the fence of the apartment complex and not even taking his car that he had came in. In the morning, his car was gone and I had a large bruise from where he had hit me. While to me this has become a funny story, I now realize how bad it could have ended up. When I was 14, I decided to take ballroom dance classes. That was kind of normal for teenagers in my generation in my country. There you had to change partners each song, so every girl would dance with every boy. In my group that consisted mostly of teens between 14 to 17, there was a really tall, almost 2-meter, 21-year-old guy named Philip. We had a nice chat the times that we danced, but he seemed weird. And because I was young and naive, and that's how I normally made friends, I told him where I lived when he asked me. And so the stalking began. At the time, I didn't realize that it was stalking. I just thought that he had too much time and that it was annoying. Philip would ride on his bike from his home, he lived on one town over, to my house and asked if I wanted to spend time outside with him and play. After doing that for a few times, I asked my parents to tell him that I'm not home when he would come over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very, very long time. At one point in time, the stalking ended for a few weeks and Philip also didn't come to dance classes. At that time, I became part of a friend group of a boy that I'd fancied. For some months, he had a girlfriend, but they split soon after and I became his girlfriend. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of my boyfriend, so he was also part of that group. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in a mental hospital multiple times, and every time he was, I was glad because then I had some peace. When I was 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady had thrown us out. She wanted to live in the property herself. And so we moved one town over. We started living 2 streets apart from my now stalker. And every time Philip was out of the hospital, he would be at my house. It wasn't as often, but still. On my father's birthday, he rang again, and because my family had guests, they told me to open the door, and there he was, looming over me like a dark, menacing shadow man. I told him to leave, and I tried to close the door, but he blocked it. So I was standing there, afraid, and I started begging him to leave. At one point, I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, but my dad just said something like, "He's your friend. It's your problem." So I went back to the door and I begged and pleaded that Philip please just leave. At one point, he was kneeling and sitting in my doorway. After almost 2 hours, he finally left, and at that point it was obvious for me. Finally, I had realized what type of behavior this was. He was a stalker, and he was absolutely fixated on me. I realized this took a long time, but I was young and I was naive. And the next day I sat down my parents and told them that I was afraid of Philip, and my dad also apologized to me for putting me in that situation and not helping. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him that I don't want any contact with him, and so he left. After a few more incidents like that, he stopped showing up at my door, and I thought that we had gotten rid of him. But every time I started to live happily, starting to forget my fear of this guy, a letter, an email, or a gift would show up and would send me back into my fears. And now at 20, I was out of school, and to pass the year, I had to wait to start my job. I worked in a grade school in a voluntary after-school club for grade schoolers. After a month or two, my mom woke me up in the morning and told me to get dressed because she had to call the cops. Apparently, Philip was again every morning at our door asking for me, and my parents didn't tell me so I wouldn't get scared. Finally, after the cops told Philip 3 times to leave, he ignored them and they arrested him, and he screamed and screamed my name, that he was burning for me and that the cops heard him. My parents and I were standing in the kitchen listening to this. The situation was just so absurd and so much for me that I started just laughing hysterically in the moment. It was a strange reaction, but I don't know, it was odd. We filed a report at the police for stalking and trespassing, but the officers said that they couldn't do anything because he hadn't hurt me physically. We tried to get a restraining order, but it didn't go through. A week later, Philip had sneaked into our garden, and like in a movie, he started throwing little rocks at my window. Throwing rocks at a girl's window is not romantic. It's creepy, especially if it's unwanted. An idiot me opened the window, but didn't see anything until it clicked, and I ran downstairs and told my father that Philip was in the garden, but Philip escaped. Now, a week after that, I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell again, and because we have no way of seeing who was at the door from our house, I opened it. And there he was again, telling me that he missed me, and saying that he had peeked through the blinds of the windows in the living room the past week to see if I was there. My parents were not home. If they had been, I would have ran, but like this, I had to swallow my fear and stand in the doorway listening to this psycho talk until my boyfriend, a now different boyfriend, showed up. I had sent him an SOS SMS and he was on his way. After my boyfriend arrived, he told Philip to leave, and thankfully he did. Philip mentioned in passing that he now also has a girlfriend. After that, I didn't see Philip again for a long time. A friend told me that he was taken by men in white coats because he had believed that his mom was possessed by the devil. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from a court. I was declared a witness and told to attend in a case against Philip for assault. Apparently, after coming out of the mental hospital, he had a big fight with his girlfriend and hit her. Because she was scared, apparently she played dead, and Philip called an ambulance and the police finally had something against him. After the hearing, he was admitted again to a mental hospital, and I finally got my restraining order, and he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from our property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements, he would go to jail. And so, after 8 long years of dealing with his crap, it was finally over. And 2 years ago, I also moved out of my parents' house. I'm posting this now because I believe that I'm starting to see him again. But it can't be. He doesn't know where I live, and he also hasn't shown up at my parents' house. But I believe that I've seen him when I leave the house. I'm not sure if this is PTSD symptoms, paranoia, anxiety, or what. I just need reassurance that it's not him again, and that I'm safe in my own home. In 2002, when I was 16, my parents went on vacation. While they were gone, I stayed at my older sister, Lisa's apartment with her and my 8-year-old niece, Sarah. It was during fall break, so Sarah and I were out of school. Since it was only a 2-bedroom apartment, Lisa let me sleep in Sarah's room, and Sarah slept in Lisa's room with her. On this particular morning, Sarah and I had both slept in. She was so excited that I was staying with them that she wanted to stay up all night watching Disney movies, and so we did. Lisa had fallen asleep on the sofa, so I picked Sarah up and put her in Lisa's bed, and then I went to bed myself. The next morning, I woke up to a man's voice. Lisa's boyfriend, Gary, had a very recognizable deep voice, kind of like Vin Diesel. This voice wasn't Gary's voice at all. This voice was an older man, and he sounded very agitated. I went into the living room to see who was here, and I saw the man sitting on the love seat closest to the front door, and Lisa was sitting in a chair adjacent to the love seat. He looked to be in his 60s, and his shirt and jacket were nearly covered in blood splatter. She shot a fearful, surprised glance at me as she forgot I was there. The man stopped talking once he noticed Lisa had looked away from him. I made eye contact with him and he smiled, and then he places the gun that he was holding onto the coffee table in front of him. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to get between him and Lisa somehow, but I knew I had to stay where I was because he would have to get past me to get to the bedroom where Sarah was still sleeping. I searched the man's face trying to figure out who he was. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him, and he broke the silence. "Hey, I didn't know anybody else was here. I'm Eddie, Gary's stepdad." I faked a smile and gave a little weak wave, and he took out a cigarette and lit it. Lisa was still sitting on the sofa, seemingly bracing herself for whatever Eddie had planned. Eddie motioned for me to sit down on the bigger sofa across from him, and I did as he said. He took out a bag of weed and some rolling papers and began to roll a joint. "You smoke, youngster?" he asked me, and Lisa spoke up. "No, he doesn't. That's my baby brother. He's only 16. Eddie laughed, looked at Lisa and then me and said, "Damn. What the hell are y'all feeding these kids? That's a big one." Lisa laughed nervously. Eddie joined her, seemingly unaware of how uncomfortable we were. I got sidetracked. Let me finish telling you what this woman did, Lisa." Eddie went on to tell Lisa that he had just shot and killed a woman he knew because she stole $100 from him the previous night after he passed out drunk at home. He said that he knew it was her because he had pistol whipped Gary's mother and made her tell him who went through his wallet while he slept. He then told Lisa he regretted not killing Gary's mother because he felt like she had set him up. He said he'd also shot the woman's husband but was unsure if he was dead. He laughed and said he knew for sure the woman was dead because her head exploded like a watermelon. And my stomach was in knots. I was sweating and I could no longer hide my fear. I heard Lisa's bedroom door open from where I sat, and I saw Sarah walking across the hallway into the bathroom. Eddie looked in the direction of the hallway. "Damn, Lisa, who else is here?" Lisa spoke quickly. "It's Sarah. Please, Eddie, you know I don't allow smoking around here. Can you go on the patio with that?" Lisa's voice trembled. Eddie must have heard the fear in her voice because he replied, "Girl, what are you scared of? I ain't gonna do nothing to you. You good people. I just wanted to come see you before I go. You know the police is probably looking for me by now, but I just couldn't leave without seeing my favorite spades partner." Eddie smiled as he stood up and gathered his bag of weed, the joint, and the gun. I heard the toilet flush and then the sound of water running in the bathroom, and I began to pray that Sarah wouldn't come out here before he left. Eddie must have read my thoughts because he said, "Don't worry, young blood. I'm gonna get on out of here before that baby can see me like this." Lisa and I both stood up as he walked to the door. Lisa opened the door for him and he walked out, and we watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away. Lisa quickly grabbed the phone and called 911. Sarah came out of the bathroom and asked if the scary man was gone, and Lisa said yes and hugged Sarah. She began to tell me that she never liked Eddie because he acted strange and looked scary. When she heard his voice on her way to the bathroom, she stayed in there because she didn't want to come out and see him. I was pacing back and forth trying to process what had just happened. Lisa explained that Eddie was a drug addict and an alcoholic. Gary's mother had kicked him out because he would keep popping up at her house. She was already aware that Eddie had attacked Gary's mother because Gary had called to tell her, though they didn't know he'd killed anyone when he came to Lisa's house. Eddie was arrested shortly after our encounter, and we had to talk to detectives. They told us the man he shot had died on the way to the hospital. It took years for me to forget the way he gleefully described killing that woman. He died in prison not long after he was finally convicted of the murders. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic, and he constantly stims with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he'll say "whittle wobbles" when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, who's 8 years old, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter hit it off, so he came over to talk to me. My son is in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time. He hits himself in the head, so I try to constantly redirect him. The man asks if my son is autistic, and I say yes, and he then asks when he was diagnosed. I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asks if he's in regular classes or special needs, and I don't answer him right away because I'm starting to get uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class, and he asks what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and then tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer a special needs class, not specifying which school my son goes to. He then asks if my son runs off a lot, and I just reply sometimes. He notices the GPS tracker on my son's ankle, and he asks while that tracks him and if he ever tries to take off. At this point, I realize that this is not a conversation that I want to have. I tell him that I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore, and he responds with, "Well, I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him not all autistic children are the same and he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter, who is upset because she was having fun playing with the little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks why we had to go, and I tell her that we had to go home and do some stuff around the house. And she's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because of that girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks he was her stepdad, and she said that the little girl told her that he was her mom's boyfriend. I ask what else she said about him, and she tells me the little girl said the man's name and that he likes to talk to girls like your mom and it makes my mom mad. I then ask if there was anything else, and she tells me the girl said that she was glad that she met my daughter because she's an only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me the little girl asked her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single or something. It could be more sinister than that, I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and say that they're sending an officer to the park, and by the time the officer got to the park, a couple of hours later, they were, of course, gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and the little girl's first names, and what I think that he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume his vehicle was in the lot. They tell me that they will call if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain that he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update. The man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend who is a sheriff deputy in the county to the south of me. They had gotten similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video and his license plate at the time. My brother's friend sent me the guy's mugshot and asked if this was the man. It was. My brother's friend was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him, and he couldn't tell me anything other than she's safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me. I found out his full name and looked up his charges. He had a warrant in the state to the north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment, and now new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have charges brought against him for that, but my story may be needed for this case. I'm not a lawyer or a law enforcement person, so I don't know specifics or how or why, but maybe to show a trend of his behavior, targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think that I went too far for calling the police, but in this case, I am confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it just went unreported. I, a 21-year-old female, live with my grandparents in a large city on a busy road. I was just in bed when I heard the doorbell ring, and I was about to answer it, but my grandpa got to the door before me, and I'm now so glad that he did. I couldn't see the front door from the hallway, but when he opened it, I heard a woman say, "Hi, my name is Taylor. I think I know you." I didn't recognize that name, and my grandpa didn't either, because he told her that he definitely didn't know her. He asked how he could help her, and I heard him open the door wider and then her quick footsteps as she ran away. After she left, I came out to ask my grandpa what had happened, and he told me about the interaction with a very puzzled look, and I immediately recognized it as suspicious. We have a Ring doorbell, so we pulled up the video that it had taken. It showed a young woman covered in tattoos approaching our yard. As she walks up, she whistles loudly to someone off camera. I watch as my grandpa opens the door, and she says that she thinks she knows him. Now, my grandpa is a retired police officer, and tonight, he happens to be wearing his t-shirt with the name of our city's police department. When he opens the door wider, she notices his shirt because her eyes widen, and that's when she ran away. I watch as the video shows her holding up her arms, crossed in an X while she's running away, and a few seconds later, a man crawls out from behind my car, parked outside, and follows her. Then, the woman can be heard whistling again as they walk down the block. My grandpa called the non-emergency police line to report suspicious activity, and 2 officers arrived 15 minutes later to hear our statements and watch the video. They seem to agree that these were probably 2 addicts working together, casing out the neighborhood to see which houses they could break into. Since there was no proof of a crime committed, the officers gave us an email to send the video to and left. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I, a 5'3", 100-pound, 21-year-old young woman, had been the one to answer the door, instead of my grandpa, a 6'2", ex-military retired police officer. Thank God he sketched out that very creepy couple lurking around my neighborhood. Leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal, right? That's why we have insurance, right? I went to the neighbor and told them what happened and gave them my insurance, phone number, and my name. All I got was his first name, and from the get-go, this dude was creepy. He kept hitting on me, trying to date me, specifically trying to, quote, feed me. I left on my drive to my mom's. I'm attending an out-of-state college and the parents are divorced. The guy I backed into, Robert, began to text me and call me. He was insistent that it was better for both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to companies that could fix it for $500 and demanding I go on a date with him so I could give him the cash for the repair and he could feed me. I don't know what his deal was with the food, and I declined everything, but started to get annoyed by his constant texts and calls. Finally, after 2 days of it with responses only consisting of "please contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me. I blocked him, but he made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay, and this was definitely not a hit and run. I blocked the second number, and then he used a new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or video of the accident to his insurance. I admit this made me angry, and I called this number and dug my nail so hard into my thigh that I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date, and trying to entice me to just pay cash. I finally screamed, "Do not contact me again, you inbred monster." My dad heard me and was upset that I had said that to someone that I was in an accident with, and that I said that to the guy who thought that I was cute and just wanted to date, and I blocked that third number. Next morning, super early, I got a text, basically saying that he finished the claim and I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through insurance and not going on a date with him. He then included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risks. Stay on a good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got scared, and that was the 5th number I blocked. Then at midnight, he texts me, "You up? I know where you live. Don't try and screw me over on insurance. I'll report it as a hit and run. You should have just gone on a date with me." I took the phone to my dad, showed him the texts, and filled him in. My dad, a pretty scary dude, then calls the guy, and he answered. "Shoot, I knew you were into me. You want to come over?" he says. My dad said that this was beyond harassment. This was his final warning to not contact me, that we didn't care how we reported it, etc. Robert began saying that I came on to him and offered him intimacy as payment and invited him to my house, none of which happened. Instantly blocked, police contacted, insurance notified, all of these things. The next day, I talk to insurance, protective order is filed, and I get another text telling me I shouldn't have involved police. Block 7th number, notify police, go to stay at my dad's because the dude doesn't have this address, and my dad is a very tall, scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. So late last night, I'm watching Star Wars with my father and older brother, and the doorbell rings. My dad goes to see who it is, and it's that Robert guy with a trash bag filled with things saying that I left these at his house. I call the police, and my dad goes ballistic, all of the things. The police come, they arrest the guy. And the bag, you're probably asking yourself? It's filled with lingerie, a knife, lip balm, and Dita Von Tess' fetish book. I just met with an attorney. And the plot twist to all of this? The guy doesn't own the house, is an illegal immigrant, and is married, and is now being deported. I feel awful he's being deported, but I genuinely think that he wanted to do terrible things to me or kill me. I go back to school in a few days, and I'm so terrified that he or someone else will follow me. I don't know if this will gain any traction, but this has been on my mind ever since it happened. I'm a respiratory therapist that works at a local hospital. I was on my way to work, about less than a mile away from my occupation, when the car in front of me quickly merged into one of the emergency lanes, as if something suddenly had just happened. Then he just sat there, no hazards going off, nothing to indicate that he planned on moving. I still had 20 minutes before I had to be at work, assuming this individual may be in distress or have car problems. I decided to be a good Samaritan. I parked on the shoulder of the road and turned on my hazards. We exchanged eye contact and I gestured a wave, rolled down my window and asked, "Are you okay?" He seemed to have either not heard me or ignored me, but he did seem to realize that I wanted to help him. He gets out of his car at this point, Keep in mind we're on an extremely busy road. I'm in my work scrubs, which tends to help people relax knowing that they're with a healthcare professional. However, this was different. When he got out of his vehicle, I assumed that he would have told me that he was in some type of pain or something that caused him to pull over so abruptly. He had been driving fine the entire time I was behind him. So I casually get out of my vehicle and walk to the back end of his car. And this is when I officially start a conversation asking if he's hurt, is something wrong. All the basics, but the thing is, his eyes were cold. He had this body language to him that almost made him seem a little unhinged or skittish. He'd not answered any of my questions, so I tried once more, asking, "Hey man, we're in the middle of a busy road. Is there something wrong with your car or something going on with you?" And he simply replied, "No." I started to feel this sensation of discomfort, like he wanted to do something to me but was restraining himself. I continued to play it off. He didn't seem drunk or high, but he had those black, beady eyes that I couldn't stop looking at. It was as if he was just a vessel to something dark. I try to continue the conversation. "Why'd you stop, man? You don't want to get hit out here." He replies, "I don't know. I don't know where to go." I didn't know what he meant by this, so I questioned further by saying, "Do you know what city you're in right now? If you're lost, I can tell you where the nearest highway is," which was also less than a mile away. His reply was a little chilling. "Anywhere but here." And I was now confused. He didn't know where he was, but felt this urge to get out of the area as quick as possible. So I asked, "What direction you wanting to go? 75 north will take you to Daytona. You take 75 south, you'll head to Cincinnati." He asked, "What would you do in my position?" Now I have no idea what he meant by this, and I simply replied, "Oh, I don't know what kind of position you're in, man. Can you drive? The hospital I work for is within view. We don't have to go in. I just want to make sure that you don't get hit." He agrees to follow me, but once I turned on my blinker to turn into the hospital, he completely stopped following me, pulled a U-turn, and sped off. Now I know this isn't the creepiest thing in the world, but you really have to try to understand just how foreign and strange this behavior was. Each time we engaged in conversation, it was as if he was contemplating telling me something, but ultimately remained silent. From the looks of it, he drove a red Toyota, approximately a RAV4 hybrid maybe, so he didn't have a broken down car, looked like he was a substance abuser. He just seemed incredibly nervous, and his fast motion gestures and twitches of all his body language has left me puzzled and still gives me shudders when I think about how he moved, talked, lack of response, declining any help, not explaining a single reason as to why he just decided to park on the side of the road. A simple, "Oh, I'm just lost," would even been enough for me to feel better about the entire situation. He just seemed incredibly paranoid and hesitant. On top of it, the entire conversation led nowhere to a situation or why he was acting so strange. I just want to make sure that he didn't need help or get hit by a car. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 19. I'm a female and had just moved out of student accommodation into an actual flat with my friend group of 6. The night we moved in, it was just me and one of the girls I'm close friends with, Lucy. I had my boyfriend over at the time, Alec, and the other people who were moving in 2 weeks later as they were all on various holidays or visiting home, so it was just the 3 of us. Lucy was in her room and Alec and I were smoking a joint in bed watching kung fu movies. Him and I start to notice a man, around 300 pounds and 6 foot, pacing outside our window and looking in occasionally. We're on a basement floor at this time, but the windows are on ground level. Okay, that's weird, but we'll just make sure that the windows are locked. 20 or so minutes pass and everything seems okay until Lucy runs into my room and says, "Babe, there's a man in the house." We left the doors unlocked by accident. Chills immediately run through my body, and I'm like, "What do you mean there's a man in the house?" And Alec is frozen solid. Me and Lucy go into the hall, and the huge man, who we saw looking into the windows, is in our hall, and we ask, "What are you doing here?" And he pulls out his phone and shows us a text message from an unsaved number with our address written on it and something about people being inside. What in God's name? He tells us he's looking for his girlfriend and that she lives here, and we're just like, "No, she does not. Please remove yourself from our home." He says okay and that he'll phone his girlfriend, and he turns his phone to low volume and he's speaking to clearly another man on the phone who is clearly not his girlfriend. With more urgency this time, we tell him to get out of our house, and he says okay. He leaves, we lock the door, and everyone is just shaking. He's still on the phone to this man outside, and I can hear them speaking a language that we don't understand, but we can hear him getting angry. I tell Alec to please make that scary man go away, and he goes outside and tells him to shift away from our doorway as he's really scaring us. He says okay, and his taxi is here. He walks up a dead-end street where no taxis go, and again, we're like, what is going on? We tell our upstairs neighbors who we had met earlier that day about the whole ordeal. We call them Charlotte, Matt, and Rob, and they inform us that the same man had tried to come into their house, insisting his girlfriend lived there. Charlotte already had a boyfriend who we knew of and had also met that day. Rob has more balls than all of us and threatened him with a knife the next time he came to their house, and he never bothered them again. Over the next couple of weeks, the man would occasionally come back and look into our bedroom window. Alec was there most times, I'm so glad for that, and I have no doubt that he'd try the door again, but it was always locked after that. When I was 19, I worked nights at this terrible hotel chain in my hometown, and it was generally pretty chill. You get your weirdos and creeps, but I can handle my own, and I got used to it pretty quickly. However, this guy was way worse than anything I had encountered up until that point. It was an average night. I spent checking in guests, doing laundry, stocking, etc. And there were 2 sets of doors at the entrance, the inner ones being locked after night shift starts. This dude shows up at around 3 a.m. and brings me through the lobby phone set between the 2 doors. Immediately before I can even get my customer service face on, he starts frantically demanding I call medical transport, which I didn't really know what he was talking about, but I try to help him the best I can, asking questions. Eventually, I just let him in so I can get a better idea of how to help, but when I do, his whole tone immediately changes. He starts speaking in this monotone voice and has this kind of dead stare. I don't know how to describe it. I've never seen eyes so void of all emotions. And not to mention, he had no physical signs of injury at all. Obviously, I was freaked out, but tried my best to carry on normally, asking him more questions. After the first 2 questions, he just stops answering completely and continues staring. I keep repeating myself, and still, he's just staring. At this point, I'm kind of fed up with him, so I say, "Alright, I'm just going to call 911 to get you help." He then starts getting frantic again, going between begging me not to call and saying they won't let me go, and I can't go back there. I tell him that I'm really not sure how to help him if he won't let me call emergency services, so he needs to leave. He didn't even seem to need medical assistance in the first place. This guy goes right back to ignoring everything I say and is just staring blankly. Honestly, I should have just called the police right then, but I was overwhelmed by him, and getting police involved is always a last resort for me, so I say, "You can rest here for 20 minutes and try to find alternative transportation, but then you gotta go." And I go into the back to watch him on the cameras. 20 minutes go by and I come out to tell him to leave, but he starts arguing nonsensically. I go back into the back in just exasperation. The cycle then repeats for like 2 more hours. Finally, I tell him I'm just calling the police, to which he replies, "Well, if you're going to be like that, I'll just leave." At this point, stuff was just comical. I'm like, "Please do, I've wanted that the whole time." And I was so done with him, so I basically am yelling at this point. He finally leaves. I did call the cops and I report him. And the freakiest part of that, while telling my boyfriend at the time about this guy, he He recognizes him from the description of his creepy stare and pulls up his mugshot with charges for assault on a woman and a bunch of other insane stuff. My then boyfriend worked at a homeless shelter for some years and had seen the guy from time to time. After that, I felt so lucky that he was just a weird, creepy annoyance for me. Who knows what would have gone down in different, more aggressive circumstances. I rescued a pit bull from a neglectful family. She was skin and bones when she came home and extremely submissive. After a week of love and affection and food, she was the most amazing dog I have ever met. The softest, cuddliest baby who wouldn't even play fight with me unless she was under a blanket and didn't know that it was me. I needed to do a quick late-night run to my local shop. There's a 40-minute round-trip route on main roads with houses, or a 15-minute round-trip route through an alleyway that wraps around the back of a school field. This alleyway has no street lamps, but I hadn't ever heard of anything bad happening, so I didn't think anything of it. So I set out with my dog in tow, and just before we reached the entrance, she stood still as a rock. I gently tried to usher her to follow me, but she refused. When I took my headphones off, I realized that she was softly growling and that I could hear a group of male voices coming from the alleyway. They soon came close enough to where I could see them, and I think there were around 5 or 6 of them. This was during COVID, so they were all wearing masks with their hoods up. My mom always told me that if I found myself in a situation like this, to not act scared. Being scared shows that you are an easy target. And with that in mind, I tugged firmly on my dog's lead to get her to follow me. She stuck to my side, literally pressing her body against my leg as I walked. Yes, it was awkward. Yes, I had to try very hard to walk normally. She was quietly growling the whole time. The men had stopped and were standing slightly off the path to one side at this point. They were talking quietly amongst themselves as we walked by. I couldn't really hear much as my heartbeat was pounding in my ears and my gut was screaming at me. Once I knew that I was at a point where the darkness of the alley made me essentially invisible, I heard one of them raise their voice slightly and said, "Nah, that's a pit," in a way that sounded like he was disagreeing, coming after me. Now, they could have just been discussing the breed of my dog. That is a likely scenario. But the gut feeling I had while walking past and for the duration I walked through the alley makes me believe otherwise. I think that these men were discussing possibly robbing me or worse. And my soft baby, who was literally scared of her own reflection, deterred them due to her being an aggressive breed. It's safe to say that we walked the long way home. I ordered a board game on Amazon last week. It got delivered. I was just sitting on the couch when I get a phone call. The guy doesn't speak my language, but I understand it's the delivery guy. I reply yes in the language that he was speaking to, "Are you home?" I start to run downstairs because my intercom isn't working while the guy screams on the phone with me to open the door. He starts kicking the building's front door, which made me stop a little as I'm a girl and both my boyfriend and roommate were upstairs, but I would be going downstairs by myself. When I get there, he had dropped the package on my front step and was standing really far off. He looked distraught and his eyes were red. He asked if the package was for me and I nodded and I grabbed the package and closed the door ASAP. I'm terrified that he might come back since he knows where I live. I don't know why he was acting that way and I was as fast as I could be. I reported him to Amazon and they will investigate the situation and reach out to me again if they need to. Thank you for the comments, and I think it's good I reported him, and I just hope he doesn't remember where I live. My female friend came to visit me for a long weekend, and I, a 22-year-old female, won't be letting her stay ever again. Now, for some backstory, we were friends for about 3 months before we moved to separate states and continued our friendship virtually until now. It's been a healthy friendship with open communication. We have our disagreements, but mostly always talked it out and moved on. They mostly revolve around her believing I don't open up enough, and for me, she does things that are inconsiderate at times, like be jealous of my long-term friends, to their faces, and have an odd attitude problem at times. It's only been shown maybe 3 times. She can also be a bit obsessive and get upset when I don't text her for more than a day. She's got loads of photos saved to her phone and remembers every little thing about me and has a list of my interests. I've seen it as endearing, until now, the trip. Now, day 1, the first day of the trip, it was great. She was bubbly and brought me a gift with a sweet note of appreciation. We went clubbing and headed to bed, separately for the night, and this is where things got weird. Remember, we slept separately. Well, I woke up, and she was in my bed. But not in my bed. She was sitting upright on top of the blankets next to me, with her feet straight out and her back against the headboard while looking forward. I was startled and said, "Oh," instinctively, and she just looked at me. She never said that she was waiting for me to wake up, or maybe she was uncomfortable on the couch. Nothing. And then she left my room. I have no clue how long that she was sitting there. Day 2 to 3. In the morning, we walked the city where she seemed to be engaged and wanting to hold my hand while we were out and about. By midday, still day 2, her attitude had shifted completely and she's near mute. She isn't conversing with me, enjoying any activities, or even smiling anymore. At the bar, arcade, or even at home watching movies. You know how those driving games take a silly little photo of your profile pic on the leaderboard? I was blowing a kissy face in mine. I glanced at hers and even snapped a pic without her noticing. Her head was tilted forward, looking up at the camera. She was blank-faced and you can mostly see the whites of her eyes. It was like the film poster of a horror film, like The Orphan from 2009. Anyways, for the rest of the trip, she continued to not smile. She was cold to every service worker, and she responded with one-word answers otherwise, and complained about any and everything. I asked her, "Are you okay?" a couple of times, and she replied, "I'm fine," avoiding eye contact every time, and the car rides were silent and dinners were silent. On day 4, the final day, I drove her to the airport at 3 a.m. I asked if she enjoyed her visit, and she said, "It was okay. It was fine." I told her I enjoyed having her, and she boarded her flight and left. I could not figure out what caused this 180-degree shift. I paid for everything, took her to all sorts of events that she wanted to go to, and even took a day off, my first sick day ever, to take her to more. I felt myself overcompensating because I felt insecure of being a terrible host or something. I've had several friends stay with me and express to me that they've enjoyed themselves so much that they never wanted to leave, and I don't believe that I did anything wrong to ruin this trip. When she arrived home, she didn't contact me, but she posted photos and videos of me captioned, "Mine," on her social media. I haven't brought this conversation up to her yet, and all of my family and friends believe that I narrowly avoided a Selena Yolanda Lifetime film situation and that I was potentially with someone unstable. But what do you think? I got home from work at around 10:30 p.m. today. I went to do my pretty typical after-work routine, check the mail, walk my dog, and eat some dinner. I went to go check the mailbox, and there was a car sitting idle in my neighbor's parking lot, and I'd never seen this car here before. Headlights were on, and a guy was sitting in the driver's seat. I live alone, and my boyfriend was over to drop me off at home after work, and I went to unlock my apartment door for him because he wanted to pet my cat while I was out walking my dog. I take my dog to her usual potty spot, which is a pretty sketchy area with very minimal lights, and that's when the guy who was in the pickup truck got out and started to approach me in the dark. He pulled out his phone and asked me if I had seen the lady on his screen. He showed me a picture of a lady who I could barely make out as she took up maybe 1/6 of his phone screen. He kept getting closer and closer as I kept telling him, no, I don't know who that is. He insisted that she lived in this apartment complex in Unit 20. My apartment is nowhere near Unit 20, it's on the other side of the complex. I kept backing away from him, and my dog could sense that there was something wrong with him and started to bark. She rarely barks until it's absolutely necessary. The more this guy talked, the more he creeped me out. He said that he needed to know her location to make sure that she's not a catfish, and he's not a bad guy because his kid is in the car waiting for him. At this point, I knew I had to get out of this situation, so I practically sprinted inside and went to go tell my boyfriend what had happened. I asked him to come out of the apartment with me to see if the car was still there, and it was, but the guy had gotten back into his truck, but is still parked in my neighbor's spot. While this was happening, my neighbor had returned home and asked the truck to move out of his parking spot, which he did, only to circle back 5 minutes later and park in the spot right next to my neighbor's car. This spooked the hell out of me, and I had ended up dialing the local non-emergency line for some peace of mind. My apartment has an extensive amount of security cameras due to the high crime rate in the area, and I'm wondering if I should report this incident to the apartment complex. I was 15 years old, living in a medium-sized city in North Florida, about 60,000 people, but some areas were really spread out and rural. Don't think of it like NYC or anything, more like a lot of houses spread out over a huge area in condensed shopping centers. I was a bit of a punk that my parents had a hard time controlling, so that meant I basically snuck out constantly and was always riding my bike around the city at all hours of the night with my friends, fighting and constantly causing trouble. For reference, I was probably 5'10", 150 pounds. My next-door neighbors were my best friends. We'll call them Nick and Tim. Nick was younger than us and probably 5'5" and 140 pounds, and Tim was 5'8" and easily 210. Nick and Tim were brothers over a year or so apart. On that night, Tim had texted me around 1 a.m. asking me to ride bikes with him and his brother to his girlfriend's house so he can get lucky. I remember being hesitant because how long the bike ride was. I just looked it up and it was 9.6 miles from my house to her street. So Tim begged and begged me to go until I agreed. Our city had a curfew, meaning any police in the area that saw you and assumed that you were a minor would stop you and possibly issue a ticket and bring you home. That meant that we had to be careful about being seen by cars going by. Well, the bike ride to her house went by without any issues. We took our time, joked around, smoked a little pot, and genuinely just enjoyed the ride together. We ran out of what little pot we had on the way and finally got to his girlfriend's house. After what felt like an hour, Tim snuck around the back to go in, and Nick and I just sat in an electrical box and talked. Maybe 30 minutes went by, and Tim triumphantly snuck out of the house bragging about his time in there and says that we should head out. Annoyed at how long it took and nearly sober, we both agreed. The first mile of the ride went by smoothly, but things changed. We had just passed a decent-sized shopping center. It was closed, and we passed by a church. We rode by it slowly, in a really zero rush at all, and after we passed it, it led to a long stretch of road with woods and canals on each side. The road name is Blank Parkway, 2 lanes on each side, separated by palm trees and landscaping in the middle. Sidewalks on both sides, and on the right side another road connects to the parkway. We were riding on the right-hand sidewalk. Off in the distance, we saw a very tall, older man wearing a yellow raincoat and a large backpack. He was walking back and forth in the sidewalk under a streetlight on the corner of the parkway and the side street. We all went silent as we got closer. I don't think he could have seen or heard us, as there were no lights over us and there were sprinklers going off in the median. I remember hearing him dragging his feet across the ground and mumbling. He was dragging his feet almost like he was trying to brush away the concrete to find something underneath. The mumbling was incoherent and frantic. Honestly, it made my heart sink and my stomach knot up. I couldn't understand anything he was saying, and the only way to get home was to go by him. Nick said, "Yo, let's cross the street and get onto the other sidewalk, and Tim and I agreed. I remember this so distinctly. We crossed the landscaped median, and a jet of sprinkler water hit me directly in the face, and it got into my mouth and eyes. It smelled like sulfur, and it tasted horribly. On the other side, we could hear the mumbling and scraping of his feet clearer. I could now see more details about him. He was smoking a cigarette and was probably 6'5", had a huge green backpack, was extremely skinny, had long gray hair, and was wearing combat boots and blue ripped jeans, and that he had a full white beard. He didn't seem to notice us until we were directly across from him. We had all our eyes looked in his direction when he suddenly stopped. He stops talking, scraping his feet, looked up from the ground, and let out this god-awful screech. It was like he tried to say 100 words all at once. None of us knew what he was trying to say, and after the initial scream I could make out swearing, asking us what we were doing, and it startled us. We were now 25 yards away from him, and then he screams, "What the F are you looking at?" I was a foolish teenager, and I piped up to say something smart, and Tim, riding next to me, grabbed onto me and said, "Don't say a word." So I didn't. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I didn't, as he kept screaming in our direction and we kept riding. And the further we rode, the fainter the screams got, and then it stopped. We crossed the street again to the other side and made it about a mile down the road, all of us on edge. We glanced over our shoulders constantly to make sure that he wasn't following us. We had talked briefly about it, how strange it was, but we were glad it was all over with, or so we thought. Nick and Tim were riding in front of me when I thought I heard something behind me. I turned around, and there he was, maybe an arm's length away, headed directly for me. The yellow raincoat hood was pulled over his head and buttoned. This guy was standing up on his mountain bike, pedaling as hard as he could. We locked eyes, and he started screaming. And I mean screaming. He screamed not words, not any language, just a constant scream as loud as he could. I have the chills writing this even now, as a 25-year-old grown man with a wife and a baby. If someone ever illustrated that image and I saw it, I would probably have a heart attack. I screamed, "He's right behind us," and stood up pedaling as hard as I could, and I think we all did, and he was right behind us the whole time, still screaming. Every so often he would get right on top of us, yelling and trying to knock us off of our bikes. I don't know how long we rode with him behind us, but it felt like an eternity. I think age played a factor because he must have gotten tired and just let us get a bit ahead. Exhausted, we pulled into the neighborhood and started cutting through the yards trying to lose him. We jumped off of our bikes and all just decided if he's still chasing us, we were going to make our stand together and fight. It was like a hive mind decision, all too tired to keep running, and it was our only option. We waited for him, but he never came. I don't ever remember hearing him. I still can't recall when we lost him. I called my house phone, waking both of my parents up in the process, and told my dad about the situation. He told me to get home and figure it out, and I asked to talk to my mother, and she yelled at me on the phone and refused to pick us up as I stood in the middle of the street hoping this crackhead didn't come and kill us all. I got home with Nick and Tim in tow, who asked if they could crash in my room, and of course I said yes. I think we all still have some weird feelings about that night, and we really never spoke of it again after that. I don't know what he wanted. He was clearly on drugs, but it makes me wonder if he would have done something really bad to us if he caught us. Recently, I was having trouble with kids knocking on my door and running away. I have severe PTSD, so this was causing me some issues at home. I got in touch with a police officer in the area who my mother knew. We met up at a coffee shop to discuss what I could do to feel safer. This was going fine until my mother brought up an old story about when our house was broken into. My memory of this is waking up on Christmas and only having one gift because everything else was taken. I was too young to really remember it, but I'm 35 now and no one has spoken to me about it since childhood, so I always thought my version was correct, except it really wasn't. What really happened was that my mother woke up in the night after hearing a noise. She knew that there were burglaries in the area because my uncle next door had his Christmas presents stolen. She got up in the dark and went to my room to pick me up. I was around 2 years old and was wide awake, standing up in my crib, wide-eyed. My mother turned on the lights and I said something about a man. She started to panic since we were alone in the house, and when she looked down, she saw little patches of burnt carpet and spent matches. The intruder had come in through the downstairs, lit matches, and dropped them still burning while they walked around. She could follow the entire trail from the back of the house to my room. Now back to the present, I was staring at my mother in the coffee shop, coffee halfway to my face, and she asked, "What?" I said I didn't recall this and remembered something else, and I quickly told her, and she said, "Oh no, that was Uncle. We nearly died in a house fire." I had an existential crisis right there because I've been deathly afraid of fires all my life, to the point of having night terrors as a little kid with no explanation. I think now I get it. I was about 12. Me and my mom had gone down to a town 45 minutes out to do some shopping with some of her friends. I had a corn snake at the time, so I asked her if I could walk around a pet store one door down from the mini supermarket that she was shopping at and to compare the prices of frozen mice with our local seller. She said sure, just to come back as soon as I was done. The pet store had been there as long as I can remember. It had a very warehouse feel about it and was poorly lit by dim fluorescent lights too far above the floor. Before checking out the mice, I just wanted to check out the rest of the store, being the curious 12-year-old that I was. As I was roaming the aisles, I noticed you. You were in every aisle I strolled down. Bald, middle-aged, a bit tubby, wearing dark blue plumber overalls over a white shirt. It was summer and it was hot, remembering why on earth you would come into a non-air-conditioned building like that. You carried a basket, but there was nothing in it. As you slowly stalked me down the aisles, I noticed your basket wasn't getting any more full. I started walking faster, taking random turns down different aisles to see if I was just being paranoid, but you were always 10 to 15 feet behind me. At some point, I finally thought that I lost you. I walked out of the pet store, and as soon as I cleared the doors, I sprinted down the street to the mini supermarket my mom was in. She hadn't even made it down the second aisle completely, and I caught up with her, immediately stripped off my bright pink hoodie and slung it into the cart, as well as ripped the hair tie out of my hair. I was smart for doing that because when I looked back at the door, there you were, standing there, still carrying the basket from the pet store and scanning this store for any sight of a 12-year-old girl in a bright pink hoodie and ponytail. When we left, I saw you in your van as you drove away, a plain white van like something out of a true crime documentary or horror film. And I think about you sometimes, and how if you'd caught me before I got to that supermarket on that quiet Wednesday afternoon, what horrors could have been waiting for me in the back of that van. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or over email, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.